This morning we are still in John chapter 18, and we have a few verses, just a few verses to look to this morning. But these verses are extremely important. For do you remember, or do you realize how often I use, standing before you, the word kingdom? Do you recognize I use that all the time? I talk about the kingdom of Jesus. I talk about the kingdom of God. I talk about the kingdom of heaven. I say that we are kingdom people. Well, the interesting thing is, in this little brief passage this morning, Jesus is going to talk specifically about the kingdom. And it's in John chapter 18, verses 33 through 37. You know that he's in the presence of Pilate. By this time, the chief priests and the Jewish leaders have handed him over to Pilate, and they have been unwilling to step foot into the palace of Pilate because of their religious thoughts. And now Pilate and Jesus are all by themselves. And it's not a harsh conversation. And it's not a hard conversation. It seems almost to be, in some ways, a very pleasant, intriguing conversation. And so I'm glad all of you are here this morning to hear a lesson about what Jesus says about his kingdom. And I'm glad for those who watch us live and online and at different times, maybe even right now. And I hope everyone is blessed by what we say. Let's look at John chapter 18, verses 33, beginning in verse 37, to verse 37. Pilate went back inside the palace, and he summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus asked, "Is this your own idea, or did others talk to you about me?" And Pilate's going to reply, "Am I a Jew? Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it that you have done?" Remember we said last week, the Jews don't even have a charge against Jesus. What is it you have done? And now Jesus responds with these words, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." And Pilate said this with exclamation, "You are a king then." And so from that little section of scripture, I want to make just 2 or 3 really what I think are important points. And I want to begin with Pilate's exclamation. And I want to tell you that Jesus really is a king. And he's the most different king that you've ever known. We only know of the kings of this earth. And Jesus is so different because Jesus is so humble. And Jesus is someone who loves all the citizens of his kingdom. And he's kind, and he's compassionate, and he knows what's going on in our lives. And he really, really cares at every moment. And that's not like the kings of this world. I have a friend who still lives back in Lubbock. I've heard him tell this story so many times. His sister died, and she died from cancer. And he and his 2 brothers were there in the house with his mother and maybe some other family members. And his brother-in-law, who was married to his sister, was there. Now, none of this family knew the President of the United States, except for the man who was married to his sister. And he said, the phone rang. and someone handed the phone to my mother. And we could hear our mother say, well, thank you, Mr. President. And I appreciate that, Mr. President. And it was George W. Bush calling her about the loss of her daughter. And that family was so impressed. You know what? The President of the United States doesn't even know my name and will never know my name and will never call me. And that's the way it normally works. But this king knows your name and knows everything about you. And so the citizens of his kingdom so adore a king like this, who's always working for our good. And because they adore him, they want to be like him. And so the citizens of the kingdom are humble and they're kind and they want to help other people and they want to glorify the king. In everything they do, they want to glorify the king. So did any of you watch a football game last Sunday night? It was the Detroit Lions and the San Francisco 49ers. Did anybody watch that football game? And if you watched the first half, you knew this may not be worth watching in the second half. Because what was it? The Lions were up 24-3, and it looked like the 49ers had no chance at all. And the second half comes, and here come the 49ers. And they score, it's 21-7. And they score 21 points. And they win the game 27-24. I get that right? Is that kind of right? Okay. I'm not too much in football. But all the attention went to one person. That was the quarterback of the 49ers, named Brock Purdy. And he's been called for a couple of years now, Mr. Irrelevant. And I kind of figured out what finally that was. The last person chosen in the NFL draft, after they'd gone through all the rounds and rounds and rounds, the very last person chosen is always the one that's tagged with this title, Mr. Irrelevant. You're last. And the 49ers picked up this Mr. Irrelevant. And it happened that the first-string quarterback got hurt and the second-string quarterback got hurt. They couldn't play through the season, and Brock Purdy comes out and plays, and he goes from Mr. Irrelevant to MVP. And in the interview after the game, here's what Brock Purdy said. He was asked about his personal journey, how it got him ready for the game, especially the second half. He was quick to credit God, this article says. Honestly, his words, honestly, I think it's just a testament to God and where he has taken me in my life. I've never been the biggest, the fastest, the strongest, or any of that. I feel like I've always had to sort of fight for what I get and work for what I get. But God has always given me an opportunity, whether that was in high school or college and now obviously in the NFL. Getting drafted last. People overlook you and all that kind of stuff. All you need is an opportunity and watch and see what God does. I put my faith and my trust in him, and he's gotten me where I am today. So when I'm down 17 points at half, honestly, I'm just thinking, all right, God, you've taken me here, win or lose, I'm going to glorify you. That's my peace, that's my joy, that's my steadfastness. That's where I get it from. I get it from God. In the fall of 2023, he said this to America. I believe that Jesus Christ did come down, and he did die for my sins, and he rose again, and he's living, And he's sitting right now beside God, the Father, on the throne. And so I believe that. It's not just some fairy tale thing. It's real. It always makes me stay level-headed with my life. The minute you have fame, if you think you're chasing status and money and all that stuff, you lose your life rather than denying yourself and picking up your cross and keeping your eyes on Jesus, his promises. Through that, that's life. That's the life worth living. And that's my identity, not football. And I thought, when people understand the King and who he is, they want to glorify the King no matter what. And he's willing to stand up in front of everyone and say, yeah, I'm Mr. Irrelevant. But God gave me an opportunity. So Jesus says a second thing. And he says, my kingdom is different. It's not of this world. It's not like the kingdoms of this world. Now, there's a lot in that, but just let me give you 2 or 3 ideas. The kingdoms of this world all have borders. In fact, right here in America right now, one of the hottest topics that we hear on the news and we talk about is the fact that we have borders and we have one border that's unprotected. And people are racing across it. But I tell you, most nations and most kingdoms, they protect their borders. So you try to cross over into the border of Russia without permission and see what happens to you. And you try to walk over into the border of North Korea without permission and see what happens to you. Or China, or Iran, or any of these nations. But this kingdom that's not of this world, it has no borders. It's as broad as this planet. And so therefore it makes no difference what you look like, what your color is, what your past is, what you've done or what you haven't done. Because his kingdom is for everyone. And I'll tell you something else different about this kingdom. This kingdom is a kingdom where the citizens never fight with each other. There's no reason to fight with each other. Oh, how many nations have had civil wars, even this one? How many nations are continuing at this moment to battle with other nations? That's not what this kingdom's about. Now, there is a fight. There is a fight. Jesus said, if my kingdom were of this world, I'd fight like everybody else fights. My people would have pulled their swords. They would have stopped those chief priests and those Jews, like Peter tried to. But that's not how my kingdom works. You see, my kingdom is about giving you a better life. My kingdom is about giving you an abundant life. My kingdom is about bettering you. And so the one that you fight is one that we call Satan, who tries to invade every one of our lives. That's the only battle you really have to fight. And even when you lose in the skirmish, Jesus is there to take care of you. Let me just show you one verse. Look at Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 12. And you know I don't like to jump around to this kind of thing. But look at this verse. Paul is saying, our struggle, our fight, is not against flesh and blood. It's not against the rulers. It's not against the authorities. It's against the powers of this dark world, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. It's against Satan. And I have to fight every single day because he's pulling on me and he's showing me things and he's trying to entice me and he's trying to pull me away from this abundant life kingdom. Let me show you something else. This kingdom, it's not of this world. It's now, but it's also forever. Look at the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, as you begin in the early pages of the Old Testament, the giant king is Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. He comes and he goes. And there's a country called Egypt, but they haven't been a world power since that day of Pharaoh. And there were the Babylonians, and no one could stop the Babylonians. And they were here and they were gone. And there were the Persians, and they were here and they were gone. And right now, Jesus is talking to Pilate, and it's the Roman Empire, and people think the Roman Empire is going to last forever. It was there and it's gone. But not this kingdom. Not this kingdom. This kingdom is right now. We are citizens of the kingdom right now. We are citizens of the abundant life, forgiven. We have this wonderful blessing of Jesus on our side right now. But you know what? We have it forever. Because our King has gone back to the heavens. And just like was said in that little article, he's at the right hand of the Father. And he's waiting for the day that you and I arrive to be there with him. And so this kingdom is forever. Isn't that amazing? Isn't it amazing what Jesus has done for this kingdom that has no borders? Where we fight spiritual battles, not physical battles, not battling with each other. We haven't had a single battle with anyone in this congregation for years. We don't fight each other. We don't fight others. We fight Satan. And so you got one last question that by now you ought to be wondering about. How do you get citizenship into this kingdom? Now in America, if I'm born here, I'm automatically an American citizen. If I'm born in Germany, I'm automatically a German citizen. If I'm born in Mexico, I'm a Mexican citizen. And then some of us allow you to go through certain things and you can earn your citizenship. Well, how do I get into this kingdom? Well, in the New Testament, there's one book. There's one little book. Now, the first 4 books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and now this one we've been studying, John, they present Jesus. They tell the story of Jesus. We've been looking at the story of Jesus for over a year. When we did Luke a long time ago, it took us 18 months. And then you have, starting in the book of Romans, all these letters. They don't really, their purpose is not to tell us how to get in. They may refer to it a little bit, but their purpose is to explain how we live as kingdom people. It explains Jesus over and over again. But sandwiched in between, right after this Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is a book of Acts. And that's where they go out into all the world as they've been told, and they preach Jesus. And in the book of Acts, it's filled with stories. It's just filled with stories. Preaching stories. And what happened in the book of Acts, you find it in chapter 2. You find it in chapter 8. A couple of times in chapter 8. Find it in chapter 9. Find it in chapter 10. Find it in chapter 16. Find it in chapter 22. These people would recognize that without Jesus, they've got sin problems. And if you continue to live in sin problems, life gets harder and harder and worse and worse. Always. I don't care what anybody tells you. It gets worse and worse. I talked to a lady this week who's taught high school chemistry for her entire career, now has retired. And she talked about how, and she was on national board. She was one of the finest chemistry teachers ever to teach in high school. And she talked about how when you get into this problem of sin, how it gets worse and worse and worse, and the degradation, and life gets worse. And there's penalty to it, and there's consequence to it. And in these stories, they find out that Jesus is here for forgiveness. And Jesus is here to lift us out of that. And he's the only one. There's nobody else. There's no other person ever lived on the face of the earth, no other person ever been given except Jesus Christ, who can take you out of this mess and put you into his kingdom. It's by his blood. And by the way, he did die for it. And they would say, I want to live better. I don't want to live free from this penalty of sin. And then every single story, they get baptized. They get baptized. And in every single story, when they come out of that, they're referred to as Christians, and they're referred to as members of the kingdom, and they're part of this body that they call the called out. Isn't that simple? Isn't that so very, very simple? That's the simple part. Then you enter into this warfare against Satan. And you enter into this life of glorifying the Father because he's been so good to you. And you glorify Jesus because he's been so good to you. All because Jesus elected to come to this earth and become our King. And we get to go home and be with him in heaven forever and forever. Someone asked me just in the last couple of weeks, I guess in heaven we won't know each other, and I guess in heaven we will just be floating around. And I said, no. The Bible teaches that we're going to have bodies. These bodies are going to be made immortal. The cancers are going to go away. And we're going to know each other. And it's going to be everything you ever dreamed of wanting and more. Because of Jesus.